Hello, my name is Joy Damousi. I'm Professor of History and the Director of the Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Australian Catholic University. I want to first of all thank Faye for a brilliantly insightful, powerful and compelling discussion of one of the most relevant emotions of our time, loneliness. Faye charts the history of loneliness, rightly arguing that loneliness is an embodied and emotional phenomena as well as a deeply social and historical one. Faye notes how it encompasses an understanding of touch, smell, the face, and its physical expression and experience through the heart, the skin, the gut. Faye defines loneliness as a disconnect between what one wants and what one has, and is often accompanied by depression, anger, shame, sadness, and hope. It is also a recent idea. Faye reminds us that before 1800, the word loneliness did not exist in the English language because it was not necessary. People did not live alone, they lived in communities, and even if they were alone, God was always with them. They could, in fact, never be alone. Modernity and the secular transformed the social, cultural and emotional history of loneliness, focusing our attention on the body as well as the mind, the social as well as the individual, and these intersections with the emotions of loneliness. In her work, Faye urges us to consider the lonely body and its senses to understand the full complexity and constellation of loneliness. Social developments over time are never far removed, of course, from considerations of loneliness, and key amongst these is the rise in single-person households. In 2019, it was estimated that between the years 2000 and 2030, single-person households around the world will record a 128% growth. Here in Australia in 2016, the Australian Bureau of Statistics recorded 2 million lone-person households, with that projected to increase somewhere between 3 and 3.5 million by 2041. Of course, we know that living alone does not automatically mean loneliness, and some, of course, relish it. But historically, this has been a significant shift, pointing to new social, cultural and economic factors to be taken into account when we consider the expression of loneliness in the 21st century. It is also important to recognise, as Faye says, that loneliness is not always negative. Faye cites the creativity of Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath of how it can be a very productive emotion. In COVID lockdown, all of these issues are front and mind, and for even further accentuate earlier efforts to address loneliness itself as an epidemic pre-COVID. What I want to do in the remainder of my talk is to offer some further reflections building on Faye's inspiring presentation. I want to amplify some of the points Faye raises and also offer some further thoughts on how we might continue to think about loneliness with historical and contemporary meaning. There are 4 points I want to raise, and I will frame these as paradoxes and fault lines in our modern world. First, it is impossible to talk about loneliness in lockdown and in the 21st century without reference to the digital age. On the one hand, all the benefits of technology, mobile phones, social media, Facebook, Zoom, the internet, Netflix, Stan, YouTube, and so on and so forth, have on the one hand been a saviour in connecting us all in these times of lockdown. We can continue to function with some semblance of normality, work, connection to family, friends, reading groups. Social connectedness can continue in some form. But on the other hand, as we know, a digital world is not enough. In fact, it paradoxically highlights and reminds us what technology can't deliver: physical contact and connection, the touch and the smell and the senses, as Faye describes it. It also further spotlights the very nature of our social relationships and what cements them, and whether there is loneliness within them too. T.S. Eliot raised this question in 1917 when he reflected, and I quote, "Everyone's alone, or so it seems to me. They make noises and think they are talking to each other. They make faces and think they understand each other, and I'm sure they don't. Is that a delusion?" My second point is that understandings of loneliness raises questions of emotional and physical and social connectedness of another kind. Here I'm referring to historic and contemporary examples of how animal-human relations can assist in alleviating anxiety, loneliness and depression and a sense of social isolation. The history of pets demonstrates how they became a part of the history of everyday life, of childhood, modernity in the middle classes, consumption, the environment, governments, humanitarianism and philanthropy. Such a history also shows us how the emotions of animal-human interactions were fundamental to these intersections, and this continues today. The growing awareness of the health benefits of the human-animal bond are well documented. These are not only through emotions of love and affection, but also providing companionship, routine, sense of purpose and fitness and touch. Obviously, this won't solve loneliness, but human-animal interactions have demonstrated that pet ownership may be associated with lesser loneliness. Third, while there is paradoxically increasing government recognition of the epidemic of loneliness on the one hand, on the other, the conditions that create it remain firmly in place and are often the result of government policies. In 2018, the then British Prime Minister, Theresa May, announced the government's first loneliness strategy, and Minister for Loneliness, Tracy Crouch, who said, quote, "Nobody should feel alone or be left with no one to turn to. Loneliness is a serious issue that affects people of all ages and backgrounds, and it is right that we tackle it head on," end quote. Destigmatising loneliness and understanding it as a public health issue, not an individualistic one, is key in moving forward. Identifying and supporting mental and physical health demands ongoing investments and commitments from governments in combating it. The issue is connected to quite wider questions of aged care, of heart disease, stroke, and broader health problems. I want to end on my final paradox and talk about emotional communities, to borrow Barbara Rosenwein's famous term, and discuss loneliness paradoxically in terms of an emotional community. To do so would be to, in Rosenwein's words, uncover systems of feeling and explore modes of emotional expression within this community. We have come a long way since 1966, when Lennon and McCartney posed the question in their #1 hit, Eleanor Rigby, "All the lonely people, where do they all come from? Where do they all belong?" In this extraordinary period under COVID lockdown, we all belong to emotional communities as we collectively experience the roller coaster of emotions, which may or may not include loneliness in some form. But as a vaccine will hopefully be found to combat this health catastrophe, the epidemic of loneliness will not disappear, but will continue to fracture the uncertain 21st century. To tackle it will demand a holistic, complex and diverse approach, as Faye argues, for the solution is a matter of the body, of emotions, the social, cultural and the political. To answer Lennon and McCartney, only then can we know where the lonely people come from and how we can make them belong. Thank you very much.